Hello, I'm Mark Ball. I'm the Artistic Director of Lift.
Hello, I'm Lyn Gardner. I write about theatre. Mark and I are going to have a conversation about Lift and the 8 years that he has been Artistic Director of the organisation. Mark, when you came to Lift 8 years ago, there were quite a lot of people at that point who thought really that perhaps Lift was a dead duck. It had lost a lot of funding from the Arts Council. It seemed to have lost its way about what its function was, why it still existed. When you came, were you in any way concerned, and how did you set about changing that?
I mean, it was always a really exciting opportunity. I mean, I grew up as a young producer looking up to Lift as this extraordinary organisation that enabled great international theatre to come into London and England, and therefore, irrespective of the kind of state it was in, its brand still stood for something that really excited me. It still stood for a kind of innate sense of curiosity about the world. It still stood for bringing innovative practice here, and I wanted to be involved in that. And yeah, I mean, I recognised that I think the organisation had reached a bit of a kind of full stop. It had run out of steam. It had been a victim of its own success in many ways, and that its reinvention, brave as it was, its reinvention hadn't worked. The view that it had run its course actually didn't reflect, I think, the kind of changing nature of the city in which it was operating. Yes, Lift had encouraged organisations like the Barbican and the South Bank and Sadler's Wells to bring over international work. But that international work, and it was great international work, that international work was largely big work on main stages from the Western European, North American canon. And when I looked around at this city, what you saw was this incredible cultural diversity, and yet there not being a cultural offer to meet the demand that the city itself generated. So I did think, if we're going to make Lift work, we can't continue to bring over the Wooster Groups, the Robert Lepages of this world, because why would we? Other people are doing that with more resources better than we could. But what we can do is go a bit more niche, actually, focus in at what the communities of the city might actually want and what might represent them.
I think that's really interesting and so true, because one of the things that's true about international culture is that there is a sort of danger, isn't there, that what you have is kind of cultural Starbucks, which is these shows that sort of travel around the world and they go to different places, but actually what the cultural offer is the same in every single place. And one of the things that it seems to me really specific that Lift has done under your leadership is to actually drill down into what this city is. And so it feels in some ways as though it's like a love letter to the city itself, and also the city looking outwards as well at the rest of the world.
Absolutely. You know, we are the London International Festival of Theatre. That's what Lift stands for. And that Londonness is absolutely at the heart of the organisation. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I see lots of brilliant work in festivals around the world, but sometimes I'm sitting in an auditorium and I forget whether I'm in Salzburg or Paris or Brussels or Berlin, because the work that I'm seeing really has no relationship to place. And for me, that's really important. A festival is a celebration of place, and you know, this is such an amazing place. You know, it's a golden opportunity to make something brilliant happen when you're inspired by London, by its history, by its cosmopolitan nature, by its diversity, by its politics, by its economics. It's so exciting. There's so much story here, and that's what I felt we also needed to connect back to that, to the sense that we were a celebration, an exploration of London, that we were about London's place in the world, but also about showcasing London to the world.
I know that you're often programming really far in advance. But nonetheless, you know, there is something about that art of curation, about bringing those shows together, and also, of course, actually being maybe just slightly ahead of the game and kind of capturing the zeitgeist. I'm thinking back in 2014 that a lot of the shows then reflected really what had happened with the Arab Spring and with questions around democracy. And then in 2016 there was shows that absolutely reflected what was going on in Europe and refugees and the way that different groups of people were treated and what we mean by justice. So I think that those things kind of do occur, whether it's planned or natural.
Yeah, and as I said, I think they occur because artists are interested in those issues, but I also think I've also felt the responsibility for Lift, and I've genuinely never been apologetic about this or felt that I was being too worthy, but I also felt that Lift is also a political statement. You know, that what we do, that the artists that we bring here, that the very fact that we bring other voices into the cultural milieu here, other voices that challenge the kind of mainstream orthodoxy or challenge the great kind of tenets of kind of British theatre. I think it's a deeply political act, actually, and so I've always been interested in the festival actually being a political platform to talk about the big important issues of today, whether that's the refugee crisis, whether it's democracy, whether it's about our relationship with Europe, which a lot of the work that I will leave in the 2018 festival for Lift will be looking at. I think that's super important. You have to have work that speaks about our times. Otherwise, for me, what's the point? You know, I mean, it doesn't mean that it has to be agitprop and worthy and hit you over the head with politics. If it does that, it's not interesting. But I passionately believe that there has to be a strong political element to the work that we do.
There's something else, isn't there, about the fact that if you're working internationally, that there are ways and means of cooperation and about how you operate that is in itself a kind of political statement, because it requires huge amounts of cooperation to make the festival happen, to make the work happen in any way. And it does seem to me that, again, that's one of the things, you know, by its very nature, that has happened with Lift, and particularly under your tenure.
Yeah, I mean, I think very much it's an act of will. You know, I do remember some things that we've done where I felt it's really super important to do this, but everything is stacked up against you not to do it. You know, we did a project in 2012, Romeo and Juliet in Baghdad, which, you know, we had great advantage of having the RSC as a co-producing partner with us on that. But it was making a version of Romeo and Juliet that looked at the Sunni Shia divide in modern Iraq, casting it in Iraq, casting women in that show in Iraq itself a really hard thing, rehearsing it in a safe place, trying to organise visas for lots of Iraqis who didn't have passports. There are lots of things which appear to be too difficult, but are so politically important. I felt it was so important to give those artists a voice, a platform to tell the story about what was going on in contemporary Iraq. Frankly, what was going on in contemporary Iraq had been caused mainly by Western intervention into Iraq since the downfall of Saddam Hussein. So you know, I felt we had an absolute responsibility to push through all of the barriers to make that show happen. And similarly with Minefield, the show that brought together British and Argentinian veterans. There's so many reasons why we couldn't do that project. Too difficult for the veterans, too difficult to ever make happen in Argentina, too difficult politically, and we faced some political difficulties between the British and the Argentinian governments actually on that show. But actually as a political statement about the very human impact of war and what our responsibility should be when we send people to enact war on our behalf, I just felt it was too important not to do. So I think just the act of making work happen in itself, is political as much as the work.
One of the things that was so true with what Rose and Lucy did with the founding of Lift back in 1981 was to change our perception in this country about what it is that theatre is or might be. And that's certainly something that you've continued to do. I mean, a lot of work that you've done in Lift since 2009 hasn't taken place in traditional venues or in a theatre at all. And quite a lot of people might question actually even whether some of the performances, whether they are theatre. I mean, my view always about that is that that's not the interesting question to ask, that the question always to ask is what is it that theatre might be? But it does feel to me very much that you've been out there imagining with the artists what is it that theatre might be.
Well, I hope so. I think that's right. And I think Rose and Lucy did a brilliant job in challenging, probably at the time, was a fairly conservative cultural orthodoxy about what theatre should be, that it should have have a writer, that it should happen on stage. And Rose and Lucy brilliantly challenged that with all sorts of work. And I think we've continued to do that. I mean, that was often the most exciting work I saw at Lift before I got here. And yes, that sense in which we've worked with artists who are questioning what theatre is, who are crossing the boundaries between theatre, music, visual art, architecture, installation. Frankly, also, I find audiences increasingly are not interested in those strict silos of theatre and dance and opera and fine art. They consume in a very promiscuous way which actually crosses over all of those kind of categories. And I think, theatre has always been, I think, one of the most problematic words in London International Festival of Theatre, one of the most problematic words of our title. And yes, I've absolutely been encouraging artists and working with artists who either because they're placing the audience at the heart of an experience, or because they're using sight interestingly, or because they're working with non-professionals in a devising process, or because they're really bringing digital through their practice and looking at looking at digital platforms to talk to the world. I've always been interested in how artists can continue to interrogate theatre, and that's the way that theatre is going to refresh itself and continue to evolve. And I mean that's hugely exciting. There is something though, I don't want to rubbish theatre because it's the thing I've worked in for the past 25 plus years. There is something though, in whatever way we are pushing the boundaries of what theatre can do, at the heart there is still in there the experience of liveness. Yeah. And that is, to me, is the essence of theatre. That you have that moment, whether it's a shared one-on-one interaction or whether it's engaging through a digital platform or whether it's being with a group of people in a space, that you have that moment of experiencing something in the here and now that feels, that is live. And that is something that no other art form can do. That is something which gives theatre its power and its potency. And I think, despite the fact that artists are experimenting with the form in many different ways, they're still keeping that at the absolute centre of what they do.
I think that fits in quite a lot, doesn't it, with that idea, the research that there's been quite a lot about at the moment, that actually people might be buying or consuming less in terms of buying another iPhone, but actually what they are very interested in are different kinds of experiences that they can then document on Instagram, or in fact actually, just in the Instagram that runs in your head and that you can talk to people about. And it seems to me that actually theatre, and particularly the kind of work that Lift has done, can very much kind of fit into that. I mean, I'm sort of quite interested when you talk about that idea of audiences being quite promiscuous, which is a really nice idea. And I think you're right, as long as actually critics like me, or in a sense actually programmers like you, don't stop them being promiscuous by trying to box things off in some way. It seems to me that perhaps that one of the things that Lift has been enormously successful about is indeed about making that kind of cultural offering in a way that really attracts a lot of people, particularly people who actually might turn around and say, oh no, theatre, that's not for me in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things that I learned about from Fierce, and I think brought some of that kind of spirit and understanding and learning to Lift. One of the great things I think I learned about Fierce was how to try and bring audiences into a dialogue about the work. You know, that theatre only lives somewhere between the performer and the audience. You can't, you know, that there's that interaction is it's impossible to produce or imagine theatre without it, and that I always feel too often that too many organisations, I think they're getting better at it and a lot better at it, but 10, 15 years ago we're not thinking enough about audiences. And audiences in a world that was changing fast, rapidly enabled by kind of, you know, a rampant digital culture, we're expecting more things. We're expecting, as you say, that kind of experience. One of the things that we learned from Fierce was how to talk to an audience about experiences, about what it would feel like to be in a show, rather than tell them about how they should expect to behave or how they should expect to kind of receive work. And so, you know, not using fancy language, not even using words like theatre became important, but tell people what it will feel like, who else will be there, what kind of experience you'll have, is I think a really important task of a curator as well, not just to think about the artist, but also to think about the audience, because it's only those two in dialogue that make something special happen.
The holy grail constantly with audiences for theatre is about that idea about getting younger and a more diverse audience in. And it seems to me that actually if you are creating more diverse theatre in different places and in different ways, then in fact actually that attracts that audience. And it seems to me that actually what's happened at Lift absolutely demonstrates that that's true, that you can get those audiences if the offering that you're making is one that is going to genuinely interest them.
It's a bit of a cliche, but people like to see themselves on stage. Yeah. You know, people like to see them represented in the culture that they experience. And therefore our theatre, I think, and Lift, and I think I've made a deliberate attempt about this at Lift, has to be more youthful, has to be more diverse, because they are the largest kind of growth sections in our societies. And you know, if we're not going to put diverse faces and diverse experiences on our stages, then we're always going to be in this terrible predicament of the arts not being representative enough. Yeah. And I mean, one of the fascinating things for me at Lift, and very noticeable through that season of work from the Middle East that we did, including Romeo and Juliet in Baghdad, is if you're brave enough to take the leap into going, do you know what, I'm going to present a version of Macbeth by a Tunisian company that no one's ever heard of in Arabic, and we're going to stick it in a theatre for 400 people. People will say to you, that's a terrible idea because no one's going to come. Yeah. You know, where's the audience going to go? Where's the audience going to come from? People, you know, traditional theatre attenders won't go because it's, you know, it's surtitled, and how are you going to reach Arab audiences? Our experience of doing that was a bit nerve-wracking because people didn't book in advance, but people turned up in droves. I remember selling only a handful of tickets to Romeo and Juliet in Baghdad and being deeply afraid that we were going to have a disaster on our hands. And half an hour before the show, 300 or 400 people just turning up from the Middle Eastern community, where word of mouth had got around that community in a different way. And those shows sold out and were incredibly popular, and they were spoken in Arabic and surtitled. There is, in a city particularly like London, there is demand that I think people ignore. People are scared about putting work on in a second language, for example, which, you know, in a city which is full of languages, has always struck me as a bit of a nonsense. And I think it's one of the things that we've disproven, actually, is that sense that non-English speaking work won't sell.
We mentioned earlier about how Rose and Lucy, when they founded Lift in 1981, the way that they opened up a British theatre culture to outside influences. Recently, we've had David Hare talking about British theatre being infected by European ideas and practitioners. But it seems to me that actually that's one of the things that Lift has done all the time, and not just about Europe. It's given us an opportunity to see the work that's being made all around the world, and different processes, different kinds of practice. And I think it's had a genuine impact on young theatre makers here, and about what it is that they think theatre is, and how they might go about making it.
I couldn't agree more. One of our patrons is Mark Rylance, and it's a quote we use often. But Mark, when he wrote to me saying, I'm delighted to be the patron of LIFT, said, I want to be patron of LIFT because I think LIFT is the most influential theatre organisation we have in England. And what he meant by that was that it was the most influential theatre organisation on artistic practice because it brought in a kind of blast of oxygen into British theatre culture, and you can see the impact many years later. I mean, LIFT were the first people to bring handspring over with Ubu and the Truth Commission, and Warhorse in the West End and around the world. You know, there is a direct linear relationship between LIFT bringing handspring over at that moment and then being picked up in the UK and eventually being commissioned by the National to make Warhorse. And there are dozens of artists who I meet who say it was seeing De La Guarda, it was seeing Robert Lepage that first time, or even more recently it was seeing Dmitry Klimov when you brought him over in 2014, and that incredible integration of design and theatre that have completely changed my practice. I mean, infecting sounds like a very loaded word, but I love infecting. You know, it's a great thing to do. It's a great thing to do, and I want that excitement about other ways of doing things to infect people like a virus, and go, you know, and kind of go far and wide.
And I think LIFT, you know, really genuinely has been so instrumental in that and has been part of that change of aesthetic that has taken place within British theatre. So I think that's really important. But of course, because of the vote for Brexit, it does feel as though there potentially might be a danger that we would find it harder to make international partnerships, particularly within Europe, and that British theatre indeed could, like Britain itself, kind of retreat and put up the walls.
I think we were devastated when Brexit happened. You know, I think it felt like a deep, grievous wound, and because it felt like a slap in the face to all the values that we held dear around openness and internationalism, and providing a generous invitation to others. But I think we can't retreat into pessimism about it. You know, I think there's a danger of going, it's so terrible, everything is going to be so terribly disrupted by Brexit. I think we have to try and find a way of working through it. Yes, it's going to be problematic. Yes, I'm sure there are going to be new and different visa restrictions. It's going to be more difficult to move people. It's going to be more bureaucratic. It's going to require more paperwork. It's going to require carnets at every border. But in the same way that I said earlier about trying to make difficult work happen in Iraq, or trying to make a difficult work happen about the relationship between Britain and Argentina, if it's important, and it really is important, you just have to find a way of making it happen. And I think LIFT and organisations like LIFT will continue to find a way of making it happen, because it has to happen. We have to be that point of light around the fact that, you know, that Britain should be a generous, opening, welcoming culture, and that we are also an inherently international and diverse society, and that we have to keep on making those invitations. So I think we're going to have to work harder. I think it's going to be more difficult, but we have to keep on doing it. And I think one of the things that I think artists are brilliant at, and it's the one thing that gives me hope. The Brexit binary is so dysfunctional because no one will change their mind on either side. You know, I am an avowed Remainer, and nothing will ever change. Nothing will ever shake my belief that leaving the EU is profoundly wrong. Equally, there are people who I have complete respect for, who share the same view about leaving the EU. There's no meeting ground in the middle. But what artists are completely brilliant about always is exploring ambiguity. And what there needs to be in the dialogue about Brexit, in the dialogue about our future, is an exploration of ambiguity, I think. Is an exploration of not hard concrete truths and certainties on each side, but what's going to happen in the middle? Where is this meeting point between these two divisions going to take place? And I think you know, artists And it's one thing I know Rufus has been trying to do at the National. I think artists should be the starting point for that kind of exploration. So I think we've had to move from being pretty devastated about Brexit to now going, look, we just need to work harder, because it feels more important than ever that organisations like Lift thrive and bring in other cultures and open people's eyes to other experiences. We just have to keep working at it.